You're listening to City of Muses on Paris Underground Radio. Hello, and welcome to City of Muses, a brand new podcast on the Paris Underground Radio Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jennifer Garrity, and each week I'll be sitting down with an artist or creative to talk about what inspires them, what their creative process is like, and how Paris fits into it all. Hello, Kasia. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with me today.
Very nice meeting with you, Jennifer. Happy to be here.
I haven't seen you in so long, and it is a delight to see your face.
Oh, yes, you too.
Can you start by telling us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
So my name is Kasia Dietz, and I am a travel writer who also designs bags based on travel, because that's sort of the thread that connects everything I do is travel and design. And my passion for creation and for creativity. I'm writing for lots of different people, but I started out by writing a blog, which is, I think, how we originally met.
I think so.
Yeah. So I have a blog called Love in the City of Light, which is, a little take on how I arrived here, because I met my now Italian husband on Prince Street in New York City many years ago now. And I've been here, I guess, it'll be 14 years soon.
Were you always a writer? Did you always consider yourself to be a writer?
So I'm from New York City. I grew up in the Hamptons, and in New York, my career was in advertising. So I was a print producer, and my role was really a liaison between the client and the creative team. And I produced lots of exciting campaigns and worked with creative people, and it was, creative myself, but I felt like there was always more I wanted to do and more I wanted to express in myself and in my creativity. So my dad was a writer, however, so I grew up with, hearing him always working away and typing and locked up in his office and working on exciting assignments. So it was definitely a dream of mine to write. And I always wrote creatively in school, and, I'd be recognized for that, which was nice. But I guess I had a fear to do it professionally because I know how competitive it is. And I did not go to school for that. I went to school for marketing. So when I moved to Paris, nobody would hire me for my job as a print producer. So thank you, Paris, for that, because that really gave me the push I needed to do something else. And as you know, we tend to recreate ourselves when we move abroad. And the expat life is a very interesting path because you just don't know where it's going to take you. And I think that's what's so exciting about it, because we're constantly writing our own story and recreating it, or writing new chapters to our story and adding new layers to our stories. So through my blog, I started writing some guest posts for other bigger blogs and some big Paris websites. I was writing for like Bonjour Paris and Hip Paris and some other sites. And I just started writing as much as I could for anyone that would listen or take my writing or give me an assignment. And then I think my first print piece was for France Today magazine. And then I wrote for Metropolitan, which is the Eurostar magazine. So little by little, I started, just pitching anyone. I think maybe it helped that I didn't have the background in journalism because I didn't know how hard it was. And like when you really know the reality of something, you might not do it, let's say. Or you might be more hesitant, like if you overthink it. So I just started doing it. I just started reaching out and writing and saying, here's my blog for the writing style, which I think really helped to create my voice. So that really helped me get my foot in the door. And I kept pushing along. And I think being a New Yorker, as you know, we're tough, we're resilient, and we're tough cookies. And we just, I just kept going and didn't take it very personally when I'd get rejections or when people wouldn't reply. I would just say, okay, it's not the right timing or it wasn't the right fit. So I just kept going. And eventually I started writing for Architectural Digest, I've done for Travel and Leisure, Condé Nast Traveler. I had some amazing assignments for them. And National Geographic. I've written for BBC, Silvercrest, which is a Singapore Airlines magazine, Hemispheres, which is a big airline magazine, Fodor's. So just, a lot of different media. And I continue to write about anything that I think is interesting and should be shared with the world, from wherever I go in the world, wherever life takes me. So,
is that how you find your subjects? It's by traveling and the thing that strikes your fancy?
I try to think about what I would be interested to read or what an editor obviously would say, oh, like, this is cool. This is different. What is this? Because there's so much information out there. There's so many people writing. I feel like we have, I don't want to say everything's been written because it's not, but there's a lot of the same out there. A lot of the 10 best restaurants in Paris or, which hotels to stay in or things like that. So I try to twist it into something else or create a new angle, which I'm not going to give away, the ideas I have right now. So someone else can write them. No, I have some ideas in the works. But for example, COVID threw a nice big wrench into my career as a travel writer. Thank you for that, COVID. And I ended up writing things like, okay, when we were last time in Venice, I remember seeing this Bocca di Leone, it's called in Italian. It's like the mouth of a lion. And it's like, it looks like a mailbox. It is for letters, but it's for complaints. It's for complaints from the citizens of Venice. The people of Venice would send complaints that would be read into the Bocca di Leone, the mouth of the lion. So I ended up writing a piece about that. Like, what is the story behind this? I interviewed a historian, I interviewed a Venetian. So things like that. Or this is a good one. I wrote a piece about the difference between Italians and French. This is really interesting to me because, as you know, living in Paris, and I know you've been to Italy and you've traveled quite a bit. There's a saying by Jean Cocteau that is, the Frenchman is an Italian in a bad mood. So I think it's quite funny because my husband's Italian and we live in France, but he, thinks it's pretty good, that quote. And there's some truth to it, I think.
I could see it, yeah.
But I basically wrote a piece about the French versus the Italian and why are the Italian much more cheery and much more, their spirit is a bit lighter, and why are the French a bit more moody and a bit more, contemplative or thoughtful, to say it in a nice way. So I have, I can't really say much about it because I'm neither French nor Italian. So I interviewed a lot of Italians and French people and wrote about that for Italy magazine. So I really tried to, write about topics that interested people and that would create a conversation and tell stories,
Interesting.
So while I've been writing, and at the same time I launched my blog, so this was back in 2009, right after I got here. So 2009, 2010, I started a handbag business as well.
Yes.
So what really took off from a marketing perspective, I guess, because people love stories, as I said, is New York advertising girl turns Parisian bag designer, So that was, a big career change for me that I started when I couldn't find work in my field in advertising. So I started designing bags, and it was always a passion of mine too, to create wearable art, essentially. So, my vision was walking into a gallery and taking down a painting and wearing it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, taking the painting off the wall and using it to put your things in, your daily essentials. So my first collection, which I started doing this in New York while I was working, just as a side project, but then I really launched it from scratch when I got to Paris at the same time that my blog started. So while I was pitching ideas for writing, I was doing the bags, and it kept me busy. It kept me, out of trouble.
Yeah.
And it kept me really engaged creatively, which is the most important thing, which as a creative person, you can understand we need to be inspired and to have projects that are constantly, something that we're flourishing in and we're constantly engaged in, basically. So I launched these bags, and some of them are hand painted. I have a collection of Paris bags, like Rive Gauche, Rive Droite, the arrondissements. I did a New York collection, of course, as a loyal New Yorker, because I always will consider myself a New Yorker in Paris, because, being Parisian, I think you really need to be born Parisian. So I continue to design bags, and they're all based upon places I've been or parts of Paris that I really love and am inspired by, like Palais Royal, or the Italian Riviera, the French Riviera. So they really span different areas of my life. So they connect personally to me. And I source all the fabrics and everything is made locally. So I first found my manufacturer just really by luck because I couldn't find anyone for the longest time. So I bought a sewing machine, made my own samples, not as well as I would have liked to because I'm not, so skilled in sewing. I can sew, but I wasn't planning to make all the bags myself. So through one of my fabric suppliers, I got some names for manufacturers, and I went to the first one and it was just a perfect fit. And I'm still working with him. It's a little atelier. And I really adore him. Like, we've had him for dinner. Like, he's such a nice guy. He's from India, in fact. So we're still working together. And every time I go there, I see other designers. And I'm like, well, not every time, but I often see other designers. And I wonder, well, like, who is this? Who made this? Like, tell me more about this collection. What is this? And through going to this manufacturer of mine, I discovered other brands in Paris. And a few of them have shops. So I started doing research also from as a journalist and as someone who's interested in seeing what other creators are doing. I have a great passion also for artisans and for everything made in Paris and made locally. I thought, you know what? I'm going to do bag painting workshops because people want to create their own bags, because people would say, oh, I love this, but what about doing something like this? And I said, rather than me do it for you, why don't you do it? So I organize bag painting workshops, which is a lot of fun. Like, I have families, I have sometimes just kids, I have sometimes just adults, like, it really ranges. So I do the workshops, and then as another offering, I do fashion tours. So I started doing fashion tours to help Americans discover really the essence of French fashion, like the designers who are not so commercial. They don't have the budgets to be necessarily in magazines or on billboards or what have you. So they are real artists, real artisans, and they manufacture locally, most of them, some of them even with my atelier. And I came upon this idea because I thought, you know what? A lot of Americans come here and they go to the same shops they have in the US. We have all of the same shops. And I know this coming from New York. Like, I was very excited when all the French brands came to New York. But being in Paris, you don't want to shop all the brands you can get back home. So, I mean, of course, people want to go to Chanel and Dior and Louis Vuitton and all that. And great, go, enjoy yourself, have a great time. But let me introduce you rather to the designer themselves and show you what they're creating, much like myself. I'm a designer who's writing about other designers, who has her finger on the pulse. I try to, at least, and to know what's happening in Paris. And, I can really introduce them to a different neighborhood that they won't necessarily see, or whether it's Saint-Germain, which most people know, I'll show them like little side streets where designers' shops are that they wouldn't have run into on their own. And they'll actually meet the designer behind the brand. So, all of my tours are very focused on actually meeting the designers, getting dressed by the designer, trying things that they normally wouldn't try. So if you are, if you're in Paris and you're wanting to look Parisian, which I think, okay, well, looking Parisian or not, we can all have our own look. And I always recommend finding things that you're comfortable wearing and that look good on you. The Parisian look, that's been written about, and I've written about that too, and that's fun. But, I always say, buy things that you're going to be happy wearing and that you're going to feel good in. And add a little scarf or a little detail here and there, a little vintage piece to make it look, a la Parisienne. But you want to feel good in what you wear. And one by one, I'm trying to convert people from buying too much commercial clothes, like buying too many fast fashion brands, which I don't support as a designer, because I am trying really only to, even for myself, to wear local designers and vintage, or used or consignment or whatever. So secondhand, because I think there's just so much stuff out there and I don't want to promote fast fashion. During my tours, I try to promote the idea of collecting versus just consuming, and buying less, but buying better. So I really try to instill that idea in people. And when they put something on, you can sort of see someone's reaction when they're dressed, if they're happy or not, and how they feel in something. And another perk of these tours is that by meeting the designer can recommend things, and they can also tailor the clothing, which is huge because everyone's a different shape and size and height. And some people need length, some people need less length. So, it's really nice because you're not going to get that experience if you go to the really high-end shops. You'll have to buy it and well, maybe you will, but it'll be, you're paying a premium for it, let's say. And this is just a different experience. And I think just by knowing some of these designers personally and being able to introduce people to this other idea of shopping locally, which I know it's not a new idea, shopping small. But when you come to Paris, which is the fashion capital, meet a designer and shop with other designers. Like it's an idea that I kind of came upon and created, and it's really taken off. So that's keeping me very busy, as is the writing. So I sort of created a work situation for myself that really connects to everything I'm passionate about.
Curious about what's going on in Paris right now? My second podcast, Don't Miss This, takes you beyond the typical and the obvious with a weekly roundup of the best of what's happening in Paris each week. Never wonder what you're missing out on again. Listen now to Don't Miss This on ParisUndergroundRadio.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be right back with City of Muses after a word from our sponsors. And now, back to City of Muses on Paris Underground Radio. It's interesting you're talking about the Paris style and people wanting to dress like a Parisian. And I do think there's something in what you said about buying something that's important, something that lasts, something that makes you feel good, that's going to last forever. That is quite a Parisian concept, even though there is a look and Parisians want to wear, black and not a lot of color and florals or anything like that. But I think there is something inherently Parisian about that concept of buying something that's going to last you, something that matters.
Yeah, Parisians do succumb to trends like a lot, like all of us.
Sure. I
think the trick from my research, my very extensive research looking into, Parisian fashion, is that the Parisians mix and match. There's not like an outfit. Americans tend to buy outfits and they don't know how to mix and match things as well, because when you buy something, you buy it, a top with pants, and this is how you're going to wear it, and maybe you'll change your shoes or your bag. Parisians, they have a knack for putting things together in maybe even an unpredictable way. And maybe if, there's a certain trend, they'll add that trend into it. But they'll have, a bag from their grandmother that they inherited, possibly from Chanel, very lucky. Or vintage Chanel, I think is the best. Or like Louis Vuitton, or something from like an Yves Saint Laurent blazer that they'll pick up at a vintage store or at the flea market, which I also do tours there because there was amazing things there. And so they'll wear that with, a trendy pair of pants and, a white sneaker or some kind of a flat shoe or something. So they put things together in a way that I think fascinates Americans because they're like, wow, and then they have a little scarf that they tie it with, or they'll put some accessory, or just the accessorizing is really what is the most Parisian to me.
I agree with that. Everybody loves a good scarf.
Yeah. And it's like it's the details. In the end of the day, it's the little details that I think make an outfit stand out. And yes, they love their black and their blues and their basics, but they love some color too. They're not afraid to add a little red, whether it's a lipstick or whether it's some, little t-shirt or something under the jacket. So it's playful to me, the way Parisians dress. And it's fun to watch, especially during Fashion Week when everyone, takes to the streets here in my neighborhood of the North Marais, and it's like a little catwalk. It's fun to see what's happening, and you can really see what's the most fashion forward of the characters of Paris at the time.
Were you always interested in fashion yourself? Like growing up, was it important to you?
Yes. So I loved playing with my dolls and dressing them.
Okay.
And I would sew clothes for myself as well. I wouldn't even make patterns. I'd just be like, okay, I'm going to take some measurements or not and just see what I could do. I was always, how can I say this? I wasn't preparing so much. If I feel like doing something, I'll get excited and
dive in.
Yeah. I'm somebody who will, try it before I analyze and make a whole plan. And I'm hello, I moved to Paris in 5 months. I didn't, give myself that much time to prepare. So, but as a kid, I always loved to sew. I was always playing with fabrics. My mom was an interior decorator, so I always had lots of fabrics at home. So in our basement growing up, I always found scraps of fabrics that I would make into clothes for my dolls or for myself. Or I had a shop where I would like sell my things in the basement. I was very entrepreneurial too. I'd resell my parents like things that they were trying to throw away. It was a lot of fun. Yeah. And I always loved fashion. I grew up also going thrift shopping, going to boutiques, going to New York City, which was 2 hours away, and going to museums and, understanding like what fashion really was historically and seeing some of the work of famous designers. So I was always interested in fashion. And even the bags came out of a project that my mom did in the 70s. She was making t-shirts. So she had carved, my mom's a really amazing artist. My dad was a writer. My mom's an artist. I grew up really in a bohemian family, which I am grateful for. And like I've inherited traits from both my parents, from my dad, the writing, and from my mom, the creativity, the more hands-on creativity. And so my mom made these beautiful t-shirts using prints that she hand carved. And she sold them at Bloomingdale's, Bergdorf Goodman. Like she really did well. My dad was doing PR, so he was helping her with that. And, my mom is Polish origin, so she wasn't, that familiar with the way America worked. And my dad was American. So she did all these beautiful carvings and prints. And I used those for my first bag collections. So I dusted those off and I started using those to print canvas. And that's really how my idea essentially came to life before I started the bags. It was just this idea to create wearable art.
It sounds like you repurposed both of your parents' passions. Like you said in the beginning, your dad was a writer, but you were afraid of becoming a writer because you saw how difficult it was, how many rejections there were. And then your mom is this artist who makes things, and you've done both of those things. Now you're a writer and you're making wearable art, as you say. And you've also sort of taken your mom's experience of being a Polish American, and so maybe not knowing how difficult it is to sell at Bergdorf's or Bloomingdale's. And you've done that here by creating your own work. Like you said, you didn't know how difficult it was to become a writer here or a designer or whatever, and you've kind of jumped in. It's so fun to see how it mirrors.
Yeah. It's incredible to be able to use passions that you've sort of inherited or that you've grown up with. And I didn't even know this, but my dad, my father wrote a lot for different political magazines, and he'd interview different politicians, and he worked in PR as well. But his real dream was to be a travel writer.
Oh, wow.
So for me doing this now, it's like, I'm fulfilling his unfinished dreams. So that to me is just makes it all worth it. All the difficulties and the moments where I'm like, oh my goodness, is anyone going to reply? Or is, now I have a new editor and this one is gone or whatever. Like it's not, nothing's easy in life. That's worth it, I guess. But, it's all worth it because I feel like he puppeteered the meeting with my husband because my dad was a big Francophile and an Italophile. He spoke both languages. So he definitely led me towards this path. And I was the one who just had the confidence, I guess, and the trust in the universe to continue moving forward in this path that he led me to and that my mom always supported me on.
That's so beautiful. How do you think that Paris has shaped your creativity, or has it?
Oh, yeah. Every day I walk out in Paris, I find something new that I didn't see before, or I find either a shop or like a little alley that has some secret behind it, or I meet someone who inspires me in a different way, or I run into somebody that's like today I ran into someone that I hadn't seen in years. And I just, it's hard to rush in Paris to get somewhere because there's so many temptations along the way. And there's like, a little chocolate shop or a new pastry shop that I wanted to try, or, I see a fashion label I haven't heard of. Like, I need to investigate this. I need to research. Who is this? Like, what are they doing? Are they sustainable? Are they made in Paris? Museums, or there's so many exhibitions. I live around lots of galleries. I live around lots of great coffee shops. So of course I have to try all the coffee shops and and all the ones opening because there's so many. I'm constantly inspired. Just even walking along the river where there's no shops really, or there's a few restaurants and little cafes, but just walking along the river, I feel like I can breathe and I can take it all in. And it's like sort of my time to just be. and to ingest everything that I'm doing and to just take a moment to appreciate what is, I guess, and what I've created, because it hasn't been easy. And I can say that there were a lot of growing pains in the beginning and a lot of questioning and a lot of wondering, like, what am I doing? Am I doing the right thing? Am I on the right path even? Before you start trusting the process, you go through a lot of bumps and hurdles along the way. So where I am now is definitely not where I always was. I think there's something to be said for each experience we have in life brings us to the next place that we need to be. Even as difficult as it may seem, I think, Paris is not obviously, it's an amazing city, and it's just so filled with beauty and good food and just the architecture, and there's everything here that, fills the soul, but it's not necessarily an easy place to move to and to find your way in. And I don't have that many French friends, but I do have a few, and I really value them very much. And I found a lot of support in the expat community, as have you, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
We are on that same sort of journey, coming from New York, coming from a place that I had already a definition of who I was. And then I came here and there was no, I became undefined again. Like I had to really, you restart. You sort of have to get back and let the ego go a bit, because, the ego is healthy to a certain degree, but not overly. You don't want to, live solely based on your ego, obviously. And yeah, it was difficult, but I think if it's going to be difficult, Paris is not a bad place to be. In terms of life, it's the setting definitely isn't hard on the eyes, let's say. It's very beautiful, and there's enough good here that, I got through it, and I found my way, and I just kept doing what I felt that I really loved doing. I really believe that in life, if we combine what we love and what we're good at, that has to lead to success, and I guest lecture at some universities, and I also teach a writing course online. I teach a few modules. And what I always tell the students is do what you need to do. Take the jobs that you might not love in the beginning, but remember that it's all going to change. Like you're going to continue on this journey, and everything you learn is going to bring you to the next place. Try to find what it is that you really love. And like I said, what it is that you are good at. Like, what are your strengths? And focus on that, and try not to get in your own way. Because often we get in our own way and we overthink things, and we know how potentially difficult it can be, because everything is difficult. So I try to guide them in a way and say, life is hopefully long, and our journey is not a direct one necessarily. It takes lots of different turns. And so by explaining even my journey of how I ended up where I am, it was not a direct line by any means. And I took lots of risks, and I trusted myself. So that's very important. And, when we're young, we don't always know that. So I think it's important to speak with people who have been there and have experienced more of life and had different careers and changed their path a few times. And that's what makes it exciting. And that's what, like right now, I think, wow, I appreciate so much what I'm doing and so much where I am, because I know what it took to get here.
That's beautiful. So where can people find you if they want to keep up to date with your writing, if they want to take one of your bag workshops or one of your fabulous fashion tours? Where can they find you?
So I'm on Instagram, Kasia Dietz, easy to find. You can find me also through Kasia Dietz Tours. My workshops and my tours are on my website, or just go to kasiadietz.com, and it's my bags, and then my writing is there as well. So I sort of created a website that splits into two, because that's my life. I'm doing a few things at the same time, but they all lead to me. So my bags are sold in a few shops in Paris, and I sell mostly online. And I have new collections coming out soonish. I hope sooner than later, but they're in the works.
Great.
And I always have new collections coming out inspired by places that I've recently visited or have visited in the past that really stuck with me. So
I visit your website sometimes just to look at your collections, because I feel like it tells me where you've been and what inspires you.
That's fun. That's cool.
Yeah. So I'm going to include links to everything so that people can connect to you really, really easily. Thank you so much for speaking with me today, Kasia. This was wonderful.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for listening to City of Muses. If you like what you've heard, please take a moment to rate and review it. This is the fastest and easiest way to help support the podcast. Tell a friend who could use a little inspiration. You can also subscribe to the Paris Underground Radio newsletter over on our website, which comes out every Sunday and gives a little peek into what's on the network for the week ahead. I'm your host, Jennifer Garrity, and you can find me on all socials at Jennyphoria. That's JennyPhoria. Thank you for listening, and may you find inspiration wherever you go. City of Muses was produced by Jennifer Garrity for Paris Underground Radio.